A little girl walks into a boardroom alone and melts the cold heart of a powerful CEO. Welcome to Tales by Orion. Let us uncover what really happened. A little uneven. Her shoes were scuffed at the toes, and she clutched a large, slightly crumpled manila envelope to her chest with an air of solemn importance, as if it contained state secrets or the map to a buried treasure. Ms. Holloway, a woman whose composure was legendary, who had faced down hostile takeover bids and irate board members without so much as a flicker of an eyelash, found herself, for a rare moment, utterly nonplussed. Children did not come to the executive floor of Sterling Valerius. Children, in Alastair Sterling's meticulously ordered universe, were an alien species, unpredictable, illogical, and entirely unwelcome. This one, however, stood before her desk with a quiet, unwavering determination in her wide, hazel eyes that seemed far too old, too knowing for such a small face. She wasn't crying, she wasn't fidgeting, she wasn't displaying any of the usual childish anxieties one might expect in such an intimidating environment. She simply stood there, waiting, her small chin held at a resolute angle. This was not a child who had merely wandered off from a lost parent. This was a child on a mission. The silence in the opulent reception area stretched, broken only by the hushed hum of the building's climate control and the distant, rhythmic tap-tap-tapping of Ms. Holloway's perfectly manicured fingernail against her polished mahogany desk. Alastair Sterling, oblivious in his cloud-born office, was about to receive a visitor who would defy all his protocols, bypass all his defenses, and perhaps, just perhaps, remind him of a language he had long forgotten, the language of the human heart. The little girl, clutching her manila envelope, was an anomaly, a tiny, unexpected tremor in the perfectly calibrated machinery of his life, a tremor that was about to send shockwaves through the foundations of his carefully constructed world. His day, already scheduled with the precision of a military campaign, was about to take a detour into uncharted territory, a territory for which no amount of wealth or power had prepared him. The Arctic fox was about to encounter a creature far more perplexing and potentially far more transformative than any he had ever faced in the brutal jungles of high finance. Ms. Evangeline Holloway, after a moment that stretched the boundaries of her legendary composure, finally found her voice. It was, as always, cool, crisp, and utterly devoid of inflection. "May I help you, child?" she inquired, her tone suggesting that the answer was almost certainly in the negative. The little girl looked up at her, her gaze direct, unwavering. "I'm here to see Mr. Alastair Sterling," she announced, her voice surprisingly clear and steady for one so small. "I have an appointment." Ms. Holloway's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched a fraction of an inch. An appointment? With Alastair Sterling? This child? It was, on its face, ludicrous. She prided herself on knowing every single entry in Mr. Sterling's meticulously curated schedule, a schedule that was guarded more fiercely than the gold reserves at Fort Knox. There were no appointments with small, determined girls in faded floral dresses. "I believe you must be mistaken," Ms. Holloway stated, her voice taking on a dismissive edge. "Mr. Sterling does not have any appointments with children. Perhaps you're lost? Is your mother or father in the building?" The little girl shook her head, her brown curls bouncing. "No, ma'am. I came by myself, and I do have an appointment. It's very important." She clutched the manila envelope tighter, as if to emphasize its significance. Ms. Holloway sighed inwardly. This was going to be tiresome. She glanced at the clock on her desk, a sleek, minimalist timepiece that, like everything else in this rarefied atmosphere, exuded an air of expensive, unyielding precision. Mr. Sterling was due to connect with the Tokyo office in precisely 17 minutes. He did not tolerate interruptions. He certainly did not tolerate unscheduled children. "I'm afraid there is no record of any such appointment," Ms. Holloway said, her tone firming, preparing to deploy the polite but impenetrable wall of executive denial that had thwarted far more formidable supplicants than this small, scruffy child. "If you'll give me your name, and perhaps the name of the person you were supposed to see, I could try to assist you." "My name is Lily Carter," the little girl said, her chin still held high. "And I am here to see Mr. Alastair Sterling. About a job." "A job?" Miss Holloway almost laughed. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it was almost impressive, but also deeply problematic. She had a strict protocol for such situations, usually involving a swift, discreet call to building security. Yet, there was something about this child, something in her solemn gaze, her quiet determination, that gave Miss Holloway pause. It wasn't defiance, not exactly. It was a strange, unshakable certainty, as if Lily Carter genuinely believed she belonged here, that her mission was not just important, but entirely legitimate. "A job," Miss Holloway repeated, her voice carefully neutral, though a flicker of something. Curiosity? Amusement? Stirred beneath her icy facade. "And what sort of job would a young lady like yourself be applying for at Sterling Valerius Industries?" Lily held up the manila envelope. "It's all in here," she said. "My resume and my proposal." Miss Holloway stared at the envelope, then back at the child. A resume? From a 7-year-old? This was veering into the realm of the surreal. She should call security. She really should. It was the sensible professional thing to do. But then she caught a glimpse of something in Lily's eyes, a fleeting shadow of worry, of a burden too heavy for such small shoulders, and for a reason she couldn't quite articulate, her hand, which had been hovering over the intercom button, hesitated. Alastair Sterling was a difficult man, a cold man, a man who had long since forgotten, if he ever knew, the language of childhood, of innocence, of simple, unadulterated hope. But Miss Holloway, beneath her own layers of polished professionalism and carefully cultivated detachment, had once been a little girl herself, a little girl with dreams, with a fierce, determined spirit. And perhaps, just perhaps, there was a tiny, almost forgotten part of her that recognized a kindred soul in this small, improbable applicant. "Mr. Sterling is extremely busy, Lily," Miss Holloway said, her voice a fraction softer now. "He does not see unscheduled visitors, especially not for job applications of this nature." Lily's lower lip trembled, just for a moment, before she firmed it again. "But he needs to see me," she insisted, her voice a little smaller now, but no less determined. It's about saving things." "Saving things?" Miss Holloway frowned. What on earth was this child talking about? This was getting stranger by the minute. Yet, she couldn't quite bring herself to dismiss her out of hand. There was a compelling urgency in Lily's demeanor, a sincerity that was hard to ignore. Against her better judgment, against every protocol drilled into her over years of loyal, efficient service, Miss Holloway made a decision. It was a reckless decision, a decision that could very well cost her her job. But suddenly, she didn't care. "Wait here, Lily," she said, her voice once again cool and professional, though if one listened very closely, one might have detected a hint of something else. Conspiracy, perhaps? Or maybe just a flicker of human warmth that had, against all odds, managed to survive in the frozen tundra of Alastair Sterling's executive suite. She rose from her desk, a tall, elegant figure, and walked towards the imposing double doors that led to Mr. Sterling's private office, the small, crumpled manila envelope, which Lily had finally, trustingly, relinquished, held carefully in her hand. The fate of Lily Carter's audacious mission, and perhaps, just perhaps, the fate of Alastair Sterling's carefully frozen heart, now rested on the improbable intervention of his formidable and suddenly, unexpectedly, human executive assistant. Alastair Sterling looked up from the quarterly earnings report, his expression one of mild, controlled annoyance, as Ms. Holloway entered his office without the customary, precisely timed buzz of the intercom. This was a breach of protocol, a deviation from the meticulously ordered universe he had so carefully constructed around himself. Such deviations were unwelcome. "Yes, Ms. Holloway," he inquired, his voice as cool and crisp as the winter air outside his panoramic window. "Is there a problem with the Tokyo connection?" "No, Mr. Sterling," Ms. Holloway replied, her own voice carefully neutral, though Alastair, who prided himself on his ability to detect even the slightest nuance of insubordination or inefficiency, thought he detected a faint, almost imperceptible tremor of something. Uncertainty? Or perhaps, even more alarmingly, amusement? There is a visitor, an unscheduled applicant, for a position. Alistair's eyebrow arched. An unscheduled applicant? On the executive floor? This was not merely a breach of protocol. It was an absurdity. Ms. Holloway, he said, his voice dropping a dangerous half-octave, you are aware that I do not conduct impromptu interviews, and that all hiring for any position goes through human resources several floors below this one. Kindly redirect this applicant to the appropriate channels and ensure that such a lapse in security does not occur again. He returned his attention to the earnings report, a clear, dismissive gesture, but Ms. Holloway did not move. She remained standing before his desk, a slim, elegant figure, holding the slightly crumpled manila envelope in her perfectly manicured hands. With all due respect, Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice surprisingly firm, I believe this particular applicant warrants a moment of your time. She is unconventional and rather insistent. Alistair looked up again, his patience wearing thin. Unconventional? Insistent? These were not qualities he valued or tolerated in his meticulously controlled world. Ms. Holloway, he began, his voice taking on the icy edge that usually signaled the imminent termination of an unproductive conversation or, on occasion, an employee. But before he could continue, Ms. Holloway did something even more unprecedented. She stepped forward and placed the manila envelope on his vast, uncluttered desk. Her name is Lily Carter, Mr. Sterling, she said, her gaze meeting his a flicker of something unreadable. Defiance? Pity? In her usually impassive eyes. She is approximately 7 years old. And this, she tapped the envelope, is her resume. She says it is a matter of saving things. 7 years old? A resume? Saving things? Alistair Sterling stared at the envelope, then at Ms. Holloway, a muscle twitching in his lean, aristocratic jaw. Was this some sort of elaborate, misguided prank? Had his usually unflappable assistant finally succumbed to the pressures of her demanding job? He was about to deliver a scathing reprimand, to demand an immediate explanation for this outrageous breach of professional conduct, when his eyes fell upon the envelope itself. It was, as he had noted, crumpled, slightly grubby, and on its surface, written in large, unsteady, crayon-drawn letters, was a single word, hope. Beneath it, in smaller, equally childish script, were the words, for Mr. A. Sterling. Urgent. Hope. The words seemed to mock him from the surface of the cheap manila paper. Hope was a commodity he had long since divested from, a foolish, sentimental illusion that had no place in the cold, hard calculus of his world. Yet there it was, staring up at him in bright, defiant, childish crayon. He looked at Ms. Holloway, whose expression was now carefully, deliberately blank. She had played her card, taken a risk. The next move was his. With a sigh that was more an exhalation of controlled exasperation than genuine weariness, Alistair Sterling reached out a lean, perfectly manicured hand and picked up the envelope. It felt surprisingly light, almost insubstantial, in his grasp. He turned it over, examining the childish script, the slightly sticky patch where a sweet had perhaps once been attached. This was, without a doubt, the most unprofessional, most ludicrous, most utterly inappropriate document ever to have graced his billion-dollar desk. He should throw it in the waste receptacle. He should summon security. He found himself, to his own profound astonishment, carefully slitting the envelope open with the silver letter opener that lay, like a ceremonial dagger, beside his Mont Blanc pen. Inside, there was a single sheet of lined notebook paper, folded neatly in half. He unfolded it. The resume was, as he had expected, a childish scrawl. Under the heading Lily Carter, My Skills, were listed in uneven, multicolored crayon lettering. 1. Good at listening, mostly. 2. Could draw happy pictures. 3. I share my snacks. 4. I try very hard. 5. I know how to be quiet when grown-ups are sad. That last one gave him pause. He felt a strange, unwelcome tightening in his chest, a ghost of an emotion he had thought long buried. He quickly suppressed it, his face remaining an impassive mask. Beneath my skills, under the heading job I am applying for, was a single enigmatic phrase, Director of Lost Stars. Director of Lost Stars? What in God's name did that even mean? It was gibberish, sentimental nonsense. He was about to toss the absurd document aside, his patience finally exhausted, when his eyes caught a small, almost invisible postscript at the very bottom of the page, written in a fainter, spideier crayon, as if added as an afterthought. P.S. I know you lost one too, Mr. Sterling. A very important one. Alistair Sterling froze. The blood seemed to drain from his face, leaving his skin feeling cold, clammy. How could this child possibly? He looked up at Ms. Holloway, his eyes, usually so cold and calculating, now wide with a sudden, raw vulnerability, a dawning, horrified comprehension. Ms. Holloway simply met his gaze, her expression still carefully neutral, but her eyes held a flicker of something. Empathy? Understanding? She is waiting outside, Mr. Sterling, Ms. Holloway said softly. She said it was very urgent, that she needed to deliver a message. Alistair Sterling stared at the childish resume, at the haunting, impossibly perceptive postscript. His meticulously constructed world, his carefully guarded composure, seemed to be fracturing, an Arctic ice floe breaking apart under the unexpected warmth of a forgotten sun. Director of Lost Stars. He felt a tremor run through him, a tremor that had nothing to do with the building's foundations and everything to do with the sudden, terrifying, and perhaps, just perhaps, liberating crumbling of his own. "Send her in, Ms. Holloway," he said, his voice barely a whisper, a strange, unfamiliar huskiness in his tone. "Send in the Director of Lost Stars." The massive, soundproof doors to Alistair Sterling's office whispered open, and Lily Carter stepped inside. She was even smaller than Ms. Holloway had described, a tiny, solitary figure dwarfed by the vast, opulent expanse of the room. The panoramic windows behind Alistair's monumental desk showcased a breathtaking, almost dizzying view of the city sprawling below, a concrete and glass testament to human ambition and endeavor. But Lily didn't seem to notice the view, or the expensive art on the walls, or the general air of intimidating, rarefied power that permeated the space. Her gaze was fixed solely on Alistair Sterling, who sat behind his desk, a remote, formidable figure, his face partially obscured by the shadows cast by the strategically placed lighting. Lily clutched a small, well-loved, and slightly battered teddy bear in one hand, a detail Miss Holloway had failed to mention, or perhaps had chosen not to, and in the other, she held another, smaller, piece of paper folded into a neat square. She walked slowly, deliberately, across the plush, silent carpet, her scuffed shoes making no sound. She stopped a respectful distance from his desk, her small chin held high, her hazel eyes, those unervingly perceptive pools, fixed on his face. Alistair watched her approach, his mind still reeling from the resume, from that impossibly insightful postscript. Who was this child? How could she possibly know? He felt a strange, unwelcome prickling behind his eyelids, a sensation he hadn't experienced in decades, not since. He ruthlessly suppressed it, his face hardening into its familiar, impassive mask. He would not be undone by a child, by a few cleverly, or perhaps accidentally, chosen words. "Miss Carter, I presume," he said, his voice cool, controlled, though if he were honest with himself, it lacked its usual unshakable authority. Lily nodded. "Yes, sir, Mr. Sterling." Her voice, though small, was clear and surprisingly steady in the vast, silent room. "Thank you for seeing me. Miss Holloway said you were very busy." "I am," Alistair confirmed, his tone curt. "So, perhaps you could enlighten me as to the meaning of this rather unconventional application." He gestured towards the childish resume that still lay on his desk, a splash of incongruous, Crayola bright color in his otherwise monochromatic world. "Director of Lost Stars? What precisely does that entail?" Lily took a small, steadying breath. She held out the folded square of paper she carried. "This is my other paper, sir," she said. It's the most important part. It's why I came." Alistair hesitated for a moment, then reached out and took the paper. It was a child's drawing, rendered in bright, cheerful crayons, the lines a little wobbly, the perspective charmingly skewed. It depicted a night sky, filled with crudely drawn, smiling stars. And in the center, there was one star, larger than the others, colored a vibrant, hopeful yellow, with a small, sad face drawn within it. Beneath this star, in careful, childish lettering, were the words, "For Alara, so she won't be lonely anymore." Alara. The name hit Alistair Sterling with the force of a physical blow. His breath caught in his throat, his heart seemed to stop, then restart with a painful, lurching thud. Alara, his daughter, his lost star, the daughter he had adored, the daughter he had lost so many years ago to a cruel, indifferent illness. The daughter whose memory he had buried so deep within himself, encased in layers of ice and ambition, that he had almost convinced himself he no longer felt the ache of her absence. Almost. He stared at the childish drawing, at the name, Alara, written in innocent, unknowing crayon, and the carefully constructed dam of his composure, already weakened by Lily's resume, finally, irrevocably, shattered. A sound escaped him, a ragged, choked sob that seemed to be torn from the very depths of his soul. He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking, the meticulously controlled facade of Alistair Sterling, the Arctic fox, crumbling into dust. He was no longer the powerful CEO, the master of a financial empire. He was just a man, a grieving father, confronted with a ghost from his past, a sorrow so profound, so overwhelming, that it threatened to consume him. Lily watched him, her small face etched with a solemn, almost adult empathy. She didn't flinch at his sudden, raw display of emotion. She didn't seem surprised or afraid. She simply waited, her gaze soft, compassionate. Then, she did something that no one in Alistair Sterling's carefully ordered world would ever have dared to do. She walked around the massive desk, her small hand still clutching her battered teddy bear, and she stood beside him. She reached out a tiny, hesitant hand and gently touched his arm, the arm that was still clad in the impeccable fabric of his bespoke suit, the arm that controlled fortunes, that moved markets. Her touch was feather-light, yet it seemed to anchor him, to pull him back from the brink of the abyss of his grief. "It's okay to cry, Mr. Sterling," she said softly, her voice a balm to his raw, aching soul. "My mommy says crying helps wash the sadness out, so there's room for the happy memories to come back in." Happy memories. He hadn't allowed himself to think of those in years. They were too painful, too poignant. He had locked them away, along with his grief, believing that to feel nothing was safer than to feel the agony of his loss. But this child, this impossible, perceptive child, with her Crayola drawing and her simple, profound wisdom, had somehow miraculously found the key to that locked room, had thrown open the doors, and was now, with a courage and compassion far beyond her years, inviting him to step back inside, to remember, to feel, to heal. The tears flowed freely now, hot, cleansing tears, tears of sorrow long suppressed, of a love that had never died. And as he wept, the little girl, Lily Carter, the self-appointed director of Lost Stars, stood beside him, her small hand a steady, comforting presence on his arm, a tiny beacon of hope in the vast, desolate darkness of his grief. The sentence, the one that had made him cry, wasn't spoken in words. It was drawn. It was a name. It was a memory. It was a lost star, suddenly, unexpectedly, found again, not in the heavens, but in the innocent, empathetic heart of a little girl. The storm of Alistair Sterling's grief, once unleashed, was a tempest. It raged through him, shaking the foundations of the icy fortress he had built around his heart, washing away years of carefully constructed composure, of ruthless, emotional detachment. He wept for Alara, for her lost laughter, for the future they would never share. He wept for himself, for the years he had spent entombed in his sorrow, a prisoner of his own making. He wept for the kindness he had forgotten, for the compassion he had suppressed, for the man he might have been, before grief had frozen his soul. Through it all, Lily Carter remained beside him, her small hand a constant, reassuring presence on his arm. She didn't speak, didn't try to offer platitudes or empty reassurances. She simply stood there, a silent, empathetic witness to his pain, her presence a quiet testament to the resilience of the human heart, to the healing power of shared sorrow. Ms. Holloway, who had been hovering discreetly near the partially open office door, her face a mask of controlled concern, made a move to enter, perhaps to offer assistance, to restore some semblance of order. But a subtle shake of Lily's head, a gesture of quiet, almost adult, authority, stopped her in her tracks. Lily seemed to understand, with an intuition far beyond her years, that this was a storm Alistair Sterling needed to weather himself, that her role was not to stop the rain, but simply to be an anchor in the flood. Gradually, the tempest began to subside. Alistair's sobs lessened, his breathing grew less ragged. He fumbled for the silk handkerchief in his breast pocket, his hands still shaking, and wiped at his tear-streaked face, feeling exposed, vulnerable, yet strangely lighter. The crushing weight that had burdened his soul for so long seemed to have eased, fractionally, as if the act of finally acknowledging his grief, of allowing himself to feel it so profoundly, had somehow diminished its power. He looked at Lily, truly looked at her, for the first time not as an anomaly, an interruption, but as a savior. Her small face was etched with concern, her hazel eyes filled with a deep, unnerving wisdom. "Thank you, Lily," he said, his voice hoarse, raspy, barely a whisper. "Thank you for remembering her." Lily offered him a small, shy smile. "I didn't know her, Mr. Sterling," she said softly, "but my mommy told me about her. She said Alara was like a little star herself, bright and full of light. And she said you haven't been the same since she went away to join the other stars in the sky." Her mommy. Of course. The connection, the source of this child's impossible knowledge, began to dawn on him. He vaguely remembered a young woman who had worked for him years ago, in the early days of his grief, a quiet, compassionate junior assistant in the philanthropy division, a division he had established in Alara's memory, but which had, over the years, become more a vehicle for tax write-offs and public relations than a genuine expression of charitable intent. Her name, it eluded him. His world then had been a blur of pain and work, his interactions with his staff perfunctory, impersonal. "Your mother, she worked for me?" Alistair asked, his voice still rough. Lily nodded. "Yes, sir. Her name is Sarah Carter. She said you were a good man then, Mr. Sterling. A kind man. Before your heart got too sad. A good man. A kind man. Had he ever truly been those things? Or had grief and ambition stripped them away, leaving only the cold, hard shell of the Arctic fox?" He looked at the childish drawing still clutched in his hand, at the smiling yellow star labeled for Alara. And he looked at Lily, at her clear, honest eyes, at the unwavering empathy in her gaze. "And this, Director of Lost Stars position, Lily," he said, a faint, watery smile touching his own lips for the first time in what felt like an eternity. "What exactly does the job entail?" Lily's face brightened. "It means finding the stars that people have lost, Mr. Sterling," she explained earnestly, her small hands gesturing animatedly. "Sometimes they're not really lost, just hidden, behind clouds of sadness or worry, or just because people forget to look up." She looked directly at him, her gaze piercing. "And sometimes," she added softly, "the lost stars are inside people. The shiny, happy parts of them that got covered up with too much grown-up stuff, or too much hurt." Alistair felt a lump form in his throat. This child, this tiny, improbable sage, was speaking a truth so profound, so elemental, that it resonated in the deepest, most forgotten corners of his soul. He had indeed lost his star, his Alara. But in doing so, he had also lost a part of himself, the part that knew how to love, to hope, to feel. And why, he asked, his voice still thick with emotion. Why did you apply for this position, Lily? With me. Lily looked down at her scuffed shoes for a moment, then back up at him, her expression a mixture of childish earnestness and a surprising, almost adult practicality. Well, sir, she began, my mommy, she's been very sad too. She lost her job a while ago, the one at the bakery. And the landlord, Mr. Grumbles. Mr. Henderson. He says if we don't pay the rent soon, we'll have to leave our apartment. And we don't have anywhere else to go. Her lower lip trembled again, but she firmed it, her small chin jutting out with a familiar determination. And Mommy said, she said you used to help people, Mr. Sterling, when you weren't so sad. She said you had a foundation for children in Alara's name. But then it just started helping important people, I think she said, not little people like us. Her innocent words were a fresh stab of guilt, a stark reminder of how far he had strayed, how his grief, his ambition, had corrupted even his noblest intentions. The Alara Foundation, once a beacon of hope, had become a hollow shell, a monument to his cynicism rather than his daughter's memory. So, Lily continued, her voice gaining a little more confidence. I thought, if I could get a job with you, Mr. Sterling, if I could help you find your lost star, maybe you could help us find a way to keep our little apartment. And maybe, she added, her eyes shining with a sudden, brilliant idea, maybe we could help the Alara Foundation find its lost star too. We could make it help all the children who are sad, or lost, or need a little bit of hope. Just like Alara would have wanted. She beamed at him, her face alight with an infectious, unshakable optimism, as if she had just solved the world's most complex problem with the simplest, most obvious solution. And Alastair Sterling, the Arctic fox, the master of a global financial empire, found himself looking at this 7-year-old child, at her tattered teddy bear, at her crayoned resume, and feeling a flicker. A tiny, fragile, almost forgotten flicker of hope. The sheer unadulterated audacity of Lily Carter's proposal, delivered with such earnest conviction, left Alastair Sterling momentarily speechless once more. Here was this child, facing eviction, her mother jobless, yet her primary concern, her job application, was not for herself, but for him, for his lost star, for the resuscitation of a charitable foundation that had long since lost its way. It was a level of altruism, of innocent, selfless compassion that he had not encountered in decades, if ever. His world was one of transactional relationships, of carefully calculated quid pro quos, of power plays and hidden agendas. Lily's world, it seemed, was one of shared snacks, happy pictures, and a profound, intuitive understanding of human sorrow. So, your proposal, Lily, Alastair said, his voice still hoarse but now tinged with a new, unfamiliar note of respect, is that you become the director of Lost Stars for Sterling Valerius Industries, and in that capacity, you will help me find my lost star and help the Alara Foundation find its purpose again. Lily nodded enthusiastically, her brown curls bouncing. Yes, sir. And maybe, if it's not too much trouble, you could also help my mommy find a new job? She makes the best blueberry muffins in the whole world. And maybe Mr. Henderson wouldn't be so grumbly if he knew we weren't going to be put out on the street. Her innocent faith in his power, in his ability to solve all her problems with a wave of his hand, was both humbling and deeply poignant. He had wielded his immense wealth and influence for so long, using it to acquire, to dominate, to control. He had forgotten, or perhaps never truly understood, its potential for good, for genuine, transformative kindness. He looked at the childish drawing again, at the smiling yellow star labeled for Alara. He thought of his daughter, of her bright, inquisitive spirit, her boundless compassion for all living things. What would Alara have thought of the man he had become? What would she have thought of the foundation established in her name? Now a sterile, corporate entity focused more on tax benefits than on tangible acts of charity. The shame was a physical ache in his chest. Lily, he began, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Your application is highly unconventional. And your proposed salary expectations? Well, we haven't even discussed those yet. A flicker of worry crossed Lily's face. Oh, salary. I didn't think about that, sir. I just want to help. And maybe enough for the rent? And some blueberry muffin ingredients for Mommy. Alistair felt a smile, a genuine, heartfelt smile, the first in what felt like a lifetime, touch his lips. It felt strange, unfamiliar, like a muscle long and used. I think, Lily, he said, his voice gentle, we can certainly arrange for blueberry muffin ingredients. And perhaps a bit more. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his vast, polished desk, a desk that suddenly felt less like a barrier and more like a bridge between their two disparate worlds. Tell me more about this. Director of Lost Stars position, Lily. What would your duties entail? How would you go about finding these lost stars? Lily's face lit up. She launched into an earnest, detailed explanation of her vision. It involved, among other things, listening stations where sad people could tell their stories without being interrupted, hope gardens planted in forgotten corners of the city, a buddy system for lonely teddy bears, and a mandatory smile quota for all Sterling Delirious employees. It was on its face, utterly absurd, a child's fantastical dream. Yet, as Alistair listened, really listened, he began to hear the profound, simple wisdom beneath the childish whimsy. Her ideas, stripped of their fanciful trappings, were about connection, about empathy, about creating spaces for healing and hope. They were about recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of every individual, regardless of their station in life. They were, in essence, everything his life, his company, his foundation had ceased to be. He thought of the countless philanthropic initiatives he had approved over the years, the sterile, data-driven projects designed to maximize public relations impact while minimizing actual engagement. He thought of the glossy brochures, the self-congratulatory press releases, the endless board meetings discussing strategic charitable investments. And he contrasted it with Lily's simple, heartfelt desire to make the sad parts go away and help people find their smiles again. Ms. Holloway, who had slipped back into the office at some point during Alistair's emotional unraveling and now stood discreetly near the door, watched the exchange with a mixture of astonishment and a dawning, reluctant admiration. She had served Alistair Sterling for 15 years. She had seen him ruthless. She had seen him brilliant. She had seen him icily controlled. She had never, ever seen him like this. Vulnerable, attentive, his carefully constructed defenses shattered by the innocent wisdom of a 7-year-old child. As Lily finished her enthusiastic exposition, her eyes shining with conviction, Alistair Sterling found himself faced with a decision that felt more significant, more momentous than any billion-dollar merger or hostile takeover he had ever orchestrated. He could dismiss this child, thank her for her interesting input, perhaps arrange for a discreet charitable donation to her mother and return his cold, sterile, predictable world. Or he could take a chance. He could embrace the absurd, the unconventional, the terrifyingly, wonderfully human. He could hire Lily Carter, not just as a symbolic gesture, but as a genuine catalyst for change, for himself, for his company, for the foundation that bore his lost daughter's name. He looked at Lily, at her hopeful, expectant face. He looked at the childish drawing of Alara's star, and he thought of the emptiness that had gnawed at his soul for so long, the hollowness that no amount of wealth or power had ever been able to fill. Lily Carter, he said, his voice firm, decisive, a spark of something new, something alive, igniting in his wintry eyes. You're hired. The words, so simple, so direct, hung in the air, pregnant with a future neither of them could yet fully comprehend. But in that moment, in that vast, opulent office high above the indifferent city, something profound, something miraculous had just begun. The Arctic fox had found his heart, and the director of Lost Stars had just reported for her first day of work. The announcement of Lily Carter's appointment as the honorary, for now, director of Lost Stars at Sterling Delirious Industries sent ripples of bewildered disbelief quickly followed by outright consternation through the upper echelons of the corporation. Alastair Sterling, the Arctic Fox, the man whose emotional range was generally believed to encompass icy displeasure and ruthless indifference, had apparently taken leave of his senses. Whispers circulated in the hushed corridors, in the exclusive executive dining room, in the sleek, minimalist boardrooms. Had he finally cracked under the pressure? Was this some bizarre, elaborate test? Or, most alarmingly, was he going soft? Miss Holloway, with her usual impeccable discretion, fielded the endless stream of incredulous inquiries with a calm, enigmatic smile, revealing nothing, confirming less. She simply stated that Mr. Sterling was exploring new avenues of corporate social responsibility and that Miss Carter was a special consultant in this endeavor. The truth, of course, was far more profound and far more personal. Alastair Sterling, in the days and weeks that followed Lily's explosive arrival in his life, found himself undergoing a seismic internal shift. It was as if the little girl, with her innocent wisdom and her unwavering empathy, had reached into the frozen recesses of his heart and jump-started it with a pair of Crayola-colored defibrillator paddles. He began, for the first time in years, to truly look at the world around him, not as a series of assets to be acquired or liabilities to be managed, but as a place filled with people. People with stories, with struggles, with hopes, with lost stars of their own. He started with Lily and her mother, Sarah. He arranged for their overdue rent to be paid, discreetly, through a third party, ensuring Mr. Henderson, the grumbly landlord, received his due without further distress to the Carters. He then met with Sarah Carter personally. He remembered her now, vaguely, from her time at the Alara Foundation, a quiet, dedicated young woman with sad eyes. He listened, truly listened, as she told him of her struggles since losing her job, of her fears for Lily's future, of her own fading hopes. And as he listened, he saw not just an ex-employee seeking assistance, but a woman of quiet strength and resilience, a mother fiercely devoted to her child, a woman whose blueberry muffins, he was soon to discover, were indeed legendary. He offered Sarah a position, not a handout, but a genuine role within the newly revitalized Alara Foundation. He tasked her with helping him reshape its mission, to strip away the layers of corporate gloss and cynical tax-driven initiatives, and to return it to its original, heartfelt purpose. To bring hope and tangible support to children and families in need, to be a genuine beacon of light in his lost daughter's name. Sarah, overwhelmed and tearfully grateful, accepted. Lily, of course, was officially instated as the Alara Foundation's Chief Ideas Officer, Junior Division, a title she embraced with solemn enthusiasm. She was given a small, brightly decorated office, formerly a disused storage closet, now transformed with rainbow-colored beanbag chairs and walls adorned with her happy pictures, next to her mother's, and she took her responsibilities very seriously. She would attend ideas meetings with Alastair and Sarah, offering her unique, often surprisingly insightful perspectives on how the foundation could better serve its purpose. Her suggestions, like the Puppy Cuddle Initiative for lonely seniors or the Starlight Storytelling Hour for children in hospital, were often whimsical, yet they were always rooted in a profound, intuitive understanding of human emotional needs. Alastair found himself looking forward to these meetings, to the refreshing honesty, the unbridled optimism, the sheer, unadulterated goodness that Lily brought into his otherwise sterile, cynical world. He began to smile more, genuine smiles that reached his eyes, transforming his harsh, aristocratic features, making him look younger, less like the Arctic Fox, and more like the man he might have been before grief had encased his heart in ice. He even, to Miss Holloway's profound, albeit carefully concealed, astonishment, allowed Lily to implement a kindness quota on the executive floor, which involved a communal compliment jar and a mandatory good deed of the day, suggestions for which included sharing your expensive biscuits and not sighing loudly when someone asks a silly question. The initial resistance from the hardened executives was considerable, but under Alastair's new, surprisingly firm insistence and Lily's unwavering, sunny conviction. Even the most cynical among them began to thaw. The compliment jar, initially regarded with scorn, began to fill with genuine, albeit sometimes awkwardly phrased, expressions of appreciation. The good deed of the day led to unexpected acts of camaraderie, of shared laughter, of a dawning, reluctant humanity in the rarefied, high-pressure atmosphere of the executive suite. Alastair Sterling was changing, and as he changed, so did the world around him. The lost stars, it seemed, were not just in the heavens or in the past. They were everywhere, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone with the courage, the compassion, and the innocent wisdom of a child to help them shine again. The journey was far from over, but a new constellation of hope, kindness, and genuine human connection was beginning to form in the once cold, dark universe of Sterling Valerius Industries, all thanks to a little girl with a battered teddy bear, a crayon-drawn resume, and a heart big enough to heal a billionaire. The transformation of Alastair Sterling, and by extension, Sterling Valerius Industries and the Alara Foundation, was not an overnight miracle, but a slow, steady unfurling, like a time-lapse film of a frozen landscape thawing under a gentle spring sun. Lily Carter, in her unofficial capacity as chief instigator of joy and general mender of sad hearts, a title she had proudly, if somewhat lengthily, bestowed upon herself, continued to be the catalyst, her innocent wisdom a constant, gentle nudge towards a more humane, more compassionate way of being. The Alara Foundation, under the joint guidance of a revitalized Alastair and a dedicated Sarah Carter, underwent a profound metamorphosis. The focus shifted from large, impersonal grants to faceless organizations to direct, impactful initiatives that touched individual lives. They established Lily's listening lounges in underserved community centers, safe spaces where people could share their struggles and find a compassionate ear. They funded Starlight Scholarships for bright, underprivileged children who, like Liam Sterling in another story yet to be told, dreamed of reaching for the stars but lacked the means. They even launched a Blueberry Muffin Brigade, where Sarah's now famous muffins, baked with love and a generous dose of hope, were delivered to homeless shelters and soup kitchens, a small, tangible symbol of warmth and care. Alastair Sterling found himself, to his own surprise, deeply involved in these initiatives. He shed his bespoke suits for more casual attire and spent afternoons reading stories to children in hospital wards. His voice, once reserved for commanding boardrooms, now softened with a tenderness that astonished those who had only known him as the Arctic Fox. He listened, truly listened, to the stories of the people the Foundation sought to help, their struggles, their hopes, their quiet acts of courage in the face of adversity. And in their stories, he found echoes of his own grief, his own loneliness, but also a dawning understanding of the profound, interconnected web of human experience. He learned that true wealth was not measured in stock portfolios or market shares, but in the currency of kindness, of compassion, of shared humanity. The changes within Sterling Valerius Industries were more subtle, but no less significant. The kindness quota on the executive floor, initially met with cynicism, had, over time, fostered a surprising sense of camaraderie. The compliment jar overflowed. Executives who had once communicated only through terse emails and passive-aggressive memos now found themselves engaging in actual conversations, sharing a joke, offering a word of encouragement. Productivity, paradoxically, increased. The atmosphere, once thick with tension and ruthless ambition, became lighter, more creative, more human. Ms. Holloway, observing these changes from her vantage point at the gates of power, found her own carefully cultivated cynicism slowly eroding. She even, on one memorable occasion, contributed a compliment to the jar, a small, anonymous note praising a junior analyst's insightful report, an act that sent ripples of astonished goodwill through the entire department. Lily, of course, remained the heart of it all. She would often visit Alastair in his vast office, not with formal proposals, but with a new drawing, a story about a stray cat she had befriended, or a freshly baked and slightly lopsided Cookie from her mother's latest batch. She would sit on the plush carpet, her battered teddy bear beside her, and simply be. Her presence was a constant reminder to Alistair of the simple, profound truths he had forgotten, of the healing power of innocence, of the unwavering light of a child's unconditional love. He learned to see the world through her eyes, to find joy in small things, to appreciate the beauty in imperfection, to understand that true strength lay not in unyielding control, but in vulnerability, in empathy, in the courage to open one's heart after it had been broken. He never forgot Alara. Her memory was no longer a source of unbearable pain, but a gentle, guiding light, a reminder of the preciousness of love, of life, of every fleeting moment. And in Lily, he saw an echo of his lost daughter's spirit, her compassion, her intuitive wisdom, her boundless capacity for joy. Lily hadn't just helped him find his lost star. She had shown him that the sky was full of them, each one unique, each one precious, each one deserving of a chance to shine. The story of the little girl who walked into the billionaire CEO's office with a crayon-drawn resume and a heart full of hope became a quiet legend within the walls of Sterling Valerius. A reminder that even in the most cynical of worlds, miracles can happen, that even the most frozen of hearts can thaw, that even the most lost of stars can find their way home. And sometimes, all it takes is the unwavering belief of a child to show us the way. If you ever feel that your own star has been lost, or that the world has grown too cold, too dark, remember Lily Carter. Remember that hope is not a foolish illusion, but a powerful, transformative force. Remember that kindness is not a weakness, but a strength. And remember to look up. The stars are always there, waiting to be rediscovered, waiting to guide you, waiting to remind you that even in the deepest darkness, there is always the promise of light. And perhaps, just perhaps, you too can become a director of lost stars for yourself and for others.